well. I feel like it's been a really long time since we've had one of these videos. We had that crazy snowstorm last week, so I hope you got a lot of, time off school. You got to play in the snow. If this was your first time ever seeing snow, let me know. That is pretty exciting. Well, I guess it snowed earlier this year, so you saw snow then, but this was a lot more. But anyways, so that happened, and then we had our Lenten video. So this week we are diving back into our Sacrament series. So even though it was a while ago, let's see if you can remember the first sacrament and then the second one that we learned about. Do you remember? Okay, so it was baptism and confession, or reconciliation, the other word for it. So those were the first two, and today we are going to be talking about Holy Communion or Holy Eucharist. So some of you have already received your first Holy Communion, but for some of you, you are preparing to receive it right now, and that is super, super exciting because I don't know if you knew this, but the sacrament of Holy Communion is actually, in a way, the most important of all the sacraments, because the church teaches that the Eucharist, communion, is the most important thing in our entire faith. The Catechism of the Catholic Church says that it's the source and summit of the faith, which basically means it's just the most, is what our entire faith is all about. And we're going to get in today as far as why that is. Why is it the most important? So the Eucharist or communion is something that you've all seen before. It's when at Mass, when the priest does the prayer and consecrates the bread and the wine, and when everyone comes up and receives the bread and the wine on their, well, sometimes not always the wine, but typically, the wafer or bread, you receive it and you eat it. If you've never received communion before, you probably just watched people go up and do this. So that's what Holy Communion is. But the thing is that it's not actually bread or a wafer that we're receiving. And it's not actually wine that we're drinking. When we receive Holy Communion, it's the actual body and blood of Jesus, which sounds a little crazy, but it's actually so amazing and really beautiful. So we learned in the other sacrament videos that every sacrament has form and matter. So the matter for this sacrament of communion is pretty simple. It's just the bread and the wine. So that is the matter, the actual physical thing that we can touch and see and all that. So bread and wine is the matter. The form is a little more complicated. So if you remember, the form is the prayer or the words that are said when the sacrament takes place. So the form for the Eucharist is when the priest says, if you remember at Mass, he says, "This is my body and this is my blood." And he says, "Take and eat, all of you, for this is my body, which will be given up for you." And then with the blood, he says, "Take this, all of you, and drink from it. For this is the chalice of my blood, the blood of the new and eternal covenant, which will be poured out for you and for many for the forgiveness of sins. Do this in memory of me." So those words hopefully sound familiar to you because you've probably heard it at Mass. Those words are the form of the sacrament of Holy Communion. So once the priest says those words and he lifts up the host, from that moment on, something amazing takes place. When those words are said, a miracle happens. And this miracle, it's a really big word, so bear with me. It's called transubstantiation. I know, that's a really complicated word, but I think you guys are really smart, so I think that you can learn it. So we're going to break it down. Trans, I want you to repeat after me. Trans, substan, ciation. Transubstantiation. You've got it. If you remember that word, I'm going to be super proud of you, and you are going to know a lot more than even a lot of adults know. So remember that word. You'll look really smart. So transubstantiation is the miracle that happens when the bread and the wine turns from bread and wine into Jesus' actual body and blood. And you might say, well, it doesn't look like Jesus' body and blood. It just looks still like bread and wine. But you're right, that's true. But that's why it's a miracle. And Jesus still to be humble, so that we know it would be kind of scary if we actually like ate a real person's flesh and skin and blood, right? Like that would be scary and might taste a little gross. So Jesus knows that. So he comes in the form of bread and wine. And so that way we can consume him. So once those words of transubstantiation take place, Jesus is there in the room with us. He's every bit as real as the person standing next to you. And you might have heard people say, God is always with us and Jesus is always with us, which is very true. But in the Eucharist, he is present and real in an even more real way. He's literally in the room just as much as anybody else who's in the room, even though we can't see him except for in the bread and wine, which is why Mass is so important and why the Eucharist is such a miracle, is because it's literally Jesus there with us. And because Jesus is the center of our faith, he's the center of everything we do, so the Eucharist, because it is Jesus, is the center and the source and summit of our faith. So it's important to remember that the Eucharist is not just a symbol of Jesus. It's just not something like a nice little sign to represent Jesus or just to remember him. No, it's actually the body and blood of Jesus. And it can be confusing for some people, and not everyone realizes that it's not a symbol, it's actually Jesus. And what's really amazing is there have been real stories of Eucharistic miracles where God did something very special and he really shows himself in the Eucharist. So there's a miracle in Italy a number of years back. There was a priest who was saying Mass, and as he said those words of the consecration, "This is my body, this is my blood," that we were talking about, that bread and wine, it actually turned into like actual blood and actual human like flesh, skin, and muscle, which I know sounds probably a little gross, but it actually turned into that. And they even had scientists look at it and they said, "Yep, this is real. This is the actual blood of a real man." And no one could explain it. And you can actually go to Italy and still see that bread, still see the blood and that flesh, the bread and wine actually turn into Jesus' body and blood, which is pretty amazing. That doesn't normally happen, but in some pretty amazing circumstances, Jesus, our God, does a miracle like that. And it just shows us how the Eucharist is actually him and helps us to believe that even more. So this is why the sacrament of First Holy Communion is so amazing and so important, because as amazing as it is to be in the same room, in the same church as the Eucharist, is Jesus actually there, when we receive our First Holy Communion, we actually receive Jesus into ourselves, into our bodies. He actually comes into our bodies, into our hearts in an amazing, incredible way. So we have to get ready for that, because that's super important and just really just incredible. It's the most amazing thing that will ever happen to us on this earth. And when you think about it, then your First Holy Communion is really one of the most important days of your entire life. So if you are getting ready for your First Holy Communion, you should get excited, because it's going to be one of the most important days in your entire life, because it's the day that for the first time, Jesus is actually going to come into your heart and into your soul in his true presence, body, blood, soul, divinity, all of him into you. It's pretty amazing. So which is why we have to get ready. We have to prepare. We have to go to Mass every Sunday. We have to try to be good, to not to sin. We have to get ready, because imagine if Jesus was coming over to your house, right? Like your mom said, "Hey, tomorrow night we gotta clean up. Jesus is coming to dinner." What do you think you and your family would do? You would probably clean the whole house. You would get ready. You would put on really nice clothes, because it's someone really important. It's Jesus. He's coming to dinner. So you get ready. You probably cook him a really nice meal. You would probably do everything you can to get ready for Jesus coming over for dinner. You probably maybe get your nicest toys out. You show him your favorite things you want to do. Maybe your favorite video game. You'd be like, "Hey, Jesus, this is my favorite video game." You get all ready for him, right? Because he's coming over. Well, when we receive Jesus into our hearts, in our bodies, when we receive communion, he's coming into us in an even more real way, in an even more close and intimate way than if he was coming over to our houses. is pretty amazing. And just like while we want to prepare our houses and want to get ready and get everything prepared for him to come over to our house, we also need to prepare our hearts and we need to prepare our souls for when we receive him into us at Mass, at Holy Communion. So it's a really exciting time. There's so much more we could talk about First Holy Communion just because it's such an important thing and it's such an important part of our faith. We're going to keep learning more as the year goes on, but that is the summary of the sacrament of First Holy Communion. So this brings us to the part of our sacrament series where we talk about our saint of this week. So this week's saint, I'm really excited to tell you about her. She's actually technically not a saint yet. She's a venerable, which means that she's on her way to becoming a saint, because when the Catholic Church says someone is a saint, they have a lot of things they need to do to prove that they're a saint. It takes a really long time. So there are different steps along the way before they say that officially someone is a saint. But this girl, she's on her way, and she has a really amazing story, and she's a really great example to us. So we're going to be talking about her today. So this is a story of Venerable Nenalina is her name. And the cool thing about her is that she was just an ordinary little girl. So the other saints that we talked about, Saint Kateri or Saint Moses the Black, you know, they did super amazing and crazy things, right? Kateri was an Indian princess. Moses was a pirate that lived a really bad life, but then changed his ways. They did amazing, incredible things, which is awesome. But the cool thing is that some saints live really crazy lives and they do really amazing things and go on all sorts of crazy adventures with Jesus. But then other saints are just ordinary people, just like you or me. And that's who Venerable Nenalina was. So she was a little girl. She grew up in Italy. I think she was born in 1930, which really maybe sounds like a long time ago, but it really wasn't that long ago. It was probably not too long before your grandparents were born. So she could technically still be alive today. She's not, but that's how recent that was, 1930. So it wasn't too long ago. She was an ordinary little girl who just loved Jesus so much. And unfortunately, she didn't have a very easy life, because when she was about 4 years old, she fell down and hurt her leg. And no, it wasn't that big of a deal because, you know, we all fall down on her legs, but her leg just didn't get any better. So her mom and dad took her to the doctor, and sadly it turned out that she was really sick and that she actually had cancer. You know, which is, you probably know of people who've had cancer. It's really serious, and there are times when sometimes you could even die from it. So some people get better, but not everybody. So I'm sure that was really scary for Nenalina and really scary for her parents. So because of that, because she got so sick, she suffered a lot, and she was in pain a lot. But she was a very special little girl, because even though she was only 4 or 5 years old, she loved Jesus, and she realized that Jesus loved her even though she was in pain, even though she was suffering. And she knew that because she was taught, her mom told her, that when we're suffering, when we're in pain, we can offer that up to help other people, to save souls. So when she was in pain, you know, when her leg really hurt, when she was feeling really sick, she would say, Jesus, I love you. I offer this pain to you, and I ask that you save souls. And did you know that you can do that too? Maybe you aren't really sick like Nenalina, but maybe if you fall down and hurt your leg, or I don't know, you're playing a sport and you get injured, or maybe something just really small annoys you, we can do that. We can take that pain and that hurt and we can offer it to Jesus, and Jesus can use that in a really powerful way. And our little sacrifices, and those sacrifices are so powerful. If we offer those up for souls, for other people, that power can even cause people who maybe wouldn't have gone to heaven to go to heaven because of our sacrifices, because of those little pains that we offered up to Jesus. Isn't that amazing? So Nenalina did it, and you and I can do that too. And you know, she was so willing to give anything to Jesus that after a while, as she was getting sicker and sicker, things were getting worse with her leg because the cancer was in her leg, and they thought maybe they would be able to save her life, but they would have to cut off her leg, which that is really sad and really scary. So her mommy was really afraid to tell her because, how is she even going to tell her that they might have to cut off her leg? So she went to Nanalina and she said, Nanalina, you know how sometimes Jesus asks us to do really hard things. And Jesus is going to ask you to do a really, really hard thing for him. And because you're really sick, he's going to ask you that in order to get you better, to hopefully get you better, that we might have to have a surgery that's going to get rid of your leg. And do you know what Nanalina said? She looked at her mom and she said, well, Mommy, if Jesus wants my leg, he can have it. Can you imagine loving Jesus that much and being that holy that even if you had to have your leg cut off, that you would just gladly give it to Jesus? That is pretty amazing that Nanalina could do something like that. So even though Nanalina was sick and even after her leg had to get cut off, she still continued to just be an ordinary girl, and she would do what ordinary little girls do. She would play with her friends. She would go to school when she could, when she wasn't too sick, and just play outside and all those other things. But what was different about Nanalina is that she would write letters to Jesus, and she would talk to Jesus all the time. And every night before she went to bed, she would write a new letter to Jesus. And when she was really little, she couldn't even write yet. She was so young, so her mom would write letters to Jesus for her until eventually she started to learn how to read and write. She was so excited that she was learning to read and write, because then she could write to Jesus all by herself. But we still have copies of the letters that she wrote to Jesus today. And she would tell Jesus about everything. She would tell him that she wanted him to come play with her tomorrow, that when she was playing outside with her friends, she said, Jesus, come play with me. So she would have Jesus in her heart as she went to play with her friends. She would tell him when she was feeling happy or sad, or there was even one of her little letters to Jesus, she said, Jesus, I've been so naughty today. Help me to be better. Because even saints make mistakes, and even saints are bad sometimes. Maybe they disobey their parents and aren't good. So she just told Jesus about everything and loved him so much. And part of the reason why we're talking about her today is she is someone, she was so excited to receive her first communion. She could not wait. There's an excerpt from one of her little letters, and she says, this is the actual quote, she says, Dear Jesus, today I'm going out and I'm going to ask the nuns to tell them that I want to make my first Holy Communion at Christmas. Jesus, come into my heart and I'll hug you very tight and kiss you. Oh Jesus, I want you forever in my heart. Isn't that so cute? She's adorable. So Nanalina, she was so excited to receive her first communion, but she couldn't receive it till she was 7 years old. So she had to wait, and every day she would talk to Jesus about how excited she was to receive her first Holy Communion. But unfortunately, she just kept getting sicker, and that surgery where they had to take her leg, it wasn't able to save her. So they were worried that she might die before she was able to receive her first communion. So she got special permission to receive her first communion, because normally you have to wait till you're at least 7, but they weren't sure she was going to make it to 7. So even though she was only 6 years old, she got special permission to receive first Holy Communion, and she was so excited. She said it was the happiest day of her life. However, not too long after she received her first communion, little Nanalina got really even more sick, and she died when she was only 6 years old. And I know this might sound like a really sad ending to the story. Do you think that's a sad ending? In a way it is, because I'm sure that was really sad for Nanalina's family and her parents and her friends, but it's also not a sad ending in a way, because she finally got to be with Jesus. And I I bet when she went to heaven, Jesus was so happy to see her. And he picked her up into his arms and gave her a big hug. And I'm sure she was just more happy than you can imagine, because that's what she had been waiting for her whole life. She loved Jesus more than anyone, and now she got to be with him forever. So in that way, it's not a sad ending to the story, because she gets to finally be with Jesus. And now she's in heaven with him forever. And that's what I love about Venerable Nanalina, is that not only she's a great example for when you're preparing for your first Holy Communion, because we should all be so excited to receive the Eucharist and receive Jesus, just like she was. But she also shows us that you don't have to wait to be a saint. You don't have to wait until you're big to be holy. You don't have to wait till you're way older to love Jesus and to want to pray. You can choose to be a saint right now. I think every single one of you are older than 6 years old, and Nanalina was 6 years old when she died, and she was able to become so holy and become a saint when she was only 6 years old. So if she can do that at 6, I know that you can do that, and hopefully I'll be able to do that too. But she shows us that you can decide right now that you are going to be a saint, that you're going to do everything you can to love Jesus, to let him into your heart every day. You, just like Annalena, you can write letters to Jesus every night. Just tell him how your day was. Offer up your little sufferings, your little pains to him, whatever's going on. Give that to Jesus. And just like Venerable Nanalina, you can be on your way to becoming a saint as well. So that is our lesson today on the Holy Eucharist. I hope you all have a great week, and we'll see you on next week's lesson. Bye.